I first saw Botticelli's The Birth of Venus in the year 2000. It's in the Uffizi Gallery, Florence. It was an experience that really etched itself on my mind. I'm standing there in this grand hall, shoulder to shoulder with these people from all over the world in front of this monumental picture, and I am just immersed in it. We're all just standing there, like gaping at it, captivated by it. It is a powerful experience. 2 years ago, I decided to go back and see that exact same work of art. And the artwork is, of course, the same. The room itself is the same, but something was different. See, as I stood there 2 years ago and looked at The Birth of Venus, I was the only person looking at Botticelli's work. Everyone else was taking a selfie of themselves looking at Botticelli's work. The experience of looking at The Birth of Venus and the experience of taking a selfie of myself looking at The Birth of Venus is a vastly different experience. Which makes me wonder, what is this doing to us? Like, what happens when an entire generation stops living life and starts performing life? Of course, this is nothing new. 400 years ago, Pascal, the great French philosopher, said this. He said, "We are not satisfied with the life we have in ourselves. We want to lead in an imaginary life in the eyes of others. So we try to make an impression. We strive to constantly embellish and preserve our imaginary being and neglect the real one." So this idea of performing our life for others or performing our life for some voice or some image, imaginary image we have in our head, this is not new. This idea of constructing out of nothing who I am, my own value, my own identity, the idea of pursuing an imaginary life and neglecting the real one, this is not new. We might not have invented it, but we have certainly perfected it. So in America, the consumer economy that turns our neighbors into competition, the myth of unlimited freedom that bequeaths to us this godlike freedom to define our own reality, blind hope that allows us to forget about death, and the extraordinary forces of technology that accelerate and amplify everything. This creates the near perfect environment for incubating that inner sense that I alone can define my reality. I alone can create my meaning in life, speak my truth, define what is real, define who I am. And that reality that I alone can do those things is then coupled with the reality that, oh no, now I have to carry the weight of defining my own identity, of creating my own reality, of speaking my truth, of defining what is good and true and beautiful. I have to do that. It is a terrible burden that is usually, traditionally reserved only for God. But in America, 2021, that's your job. So cultural commentators, historians, social psychologists, and monks, people like Ezra Klein, David Brooks, Jonathan Haidt, Carl Trueman, Thomas Merton, and others, they point out that not so long ago, just not too many years ago in world history, your identity, your meaning, your place in the cosmos was not yours to define. That it was given to you by God, by your body, by your community, by your church, by your family. Now, there's a downside to this. The downside of letting others give you your identity is that it's so limiting. Like, what if I don't want to be a Christian? Or what if I don't want to be your son? Or what if I don't want to be part of this community or identified with these people or part of this family? Or what if I don't want to be a man? The upside was that my identity was then substantial. It was weighty. It was stable. Like, I could know to the depths of my being who I am and my role in this cosmic play. But in the name of freedom, we've thrown off all those shackles. We've become what is called the modern self, the untethered self, that nothing holds me back, nothing defines me. So in America today, when we say you can be anything you want to be, we literally mean you can be anything. Like, no one and nothing can define you, which is just amazing. Now, the downside is that it is now your job to create meaning, purpose, your identity in the universe. And again, it's a tough job being God. So the French philosopher, cafe goer, atheist, a short little perverted man, Jean-Paul Sartre, he saw this coming back in the 1950s. So in his work, Being and Nothingness, he talks about this. He suggests that modern humanity, when they wake up to the fact that your identity, your reality is entirely up to you to define, as soon as they wake up to that reality, they will be faced with the terrifying prospect that their identity, their reality, is in fact nothing. Hence the name, Being and Nothing. It's made up. It's not real. It's nothing. But nobody wants to be nothing, he says. So in an attempt to assert themselves, to say, no, I'm really somebody, they're going to collect to themselves jobs and achievements and wealth and education and athletic ability, political parties, things that try to define them, give them structure, give them substance to their life, meaning. So they'll surround themselves with causes, things, experiences, in a desperate attempt to turn their nothing into something. But, he says, when we do this, we will inevitably run into other people. So if you define yourself as like, I am the wealthy person, then you'll meet someone else who's wealthier. Or I'm the educated person, you'll meet someone who has more education. I'm the athlete, then you'll meet the better athlete. I vote for this party, you'll meet someone who votes for a different party. And this will threaten our identity, our very existence, our meaning in the universe. So we'll run from these people. We will choose to break into tribes. We will isolate in order to preserve our identity that we have created, so that because other people, they'll challenge our self-identity, our reality. They will make us realize that we are actually nothing. And in his words, we will realize that hell is other people. Now, whether or not you buy this French guy's presuppositions, I happen to think he was like spiking his cappuccinos with absinthe or something. But whether or not you believe this, his description, is a shockingly good description of what's happening all around us today. We as a society, America 2021, we are self-isolating. We are dividing into extreme tribalism, and I'm not just talking about the pandemic. I'm talking about the trajectory of our culture the past 60, 70 years. Again, there's lots of theories as to why this is. You might agree with Sartre, you might not. Is it because we're trying to create our own identity in a way that is untethered and disconnected from God, creation, and others? Is that why we're so isolated? Is it because social media is retraining us to perform our lives as opposed to actually live our lives? So we can't connect with people in real relationships because we're always performing for them. Is it because we believe the myth of the consumer economy, that happiness is just on the other side of more? So people, they become competition. Someone who might take our experiences, might take our position at the school of our choice, or they might take the partner of our choice, or they might take the house of our choice, or they might take the retirement home of our choice. Is it because we're just so chronically busy that we just don't have time for relationships? Whatever the cause, there is no denying the effects. We live in an era of extreme tribalism. Our nation is completely and irreconcilably divided. So a disagreement over some matter of policy, over healthcare, immigration, or taxation, is no longer a discussion of policy. It is an attack against my identity, against my truth, against my reality, against my selfhood. So if I give in to your position, I am no longer who I am. I must hold my position even if it is irrational, immoral, or just plain nonsense, because it is my truth. We are living in an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. So according to the survey, the Survey Center on American Life, the percentage of Americans who say, I have zero close friends, that has quadrupled since 1990. According to Scientific American, check this quote, March 2019, 47% of Americans often feel alone, left out, and lacking meaningful connection with others. This is true for all ages, from teenagers to older adults. The number of people who perceive themselves to be alone, isolated, or distant from others has reached epidemic levels. This was written before the pandemic. The pandemic didn't cause this, it just exposed what was already happening. So the CDC and the U.S. Department of Health have already issued reports on the mounting health risks of social isolation. In 2019, again, pre-pandemic, the U.S. Department of Health wrote, and I quote, "Loneliness and social isolation can be as damaging to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day." So whatever it is, there's like something in the water, something in the way we do life, something in this American cocktail that closes us off to others, isolates us, leads to extreme tribalism, and is literally killing us. So here's the question I want to ask today. Here's what I want to explore. How do we, as people called by God to live differently, as followers of Jesus, how do we break out of this whirlpool that's sucking us under and catch our breath? Like, how do we get off this moving sidewalk and start to walk the other way? How do we, the church, people who claim to follow Jesus, claim to know God, how do we become a people of unity, belonging, dignity, and peace in a world of division, isolation, objectification, and competition? This brings us back to our topic, Sabbath. So Sabbath, again, just for a review, is the Hebrew word that means cease or rest. But we've seen over the past few weeks that it's a lot more than this, that it is presented in scriptures as this space that we enter into, this grace-filled country, this palace in time, that Sabbath lies at the very heart of a relationship with God. It is at the heart of the Ten Commandments. It is the space in which our love for God, the first 3 commandments in the Ten Commandments, and our love for others, the commandments 5 through 10, it's where they grow. It's where they flourish. So 2 weeks ago, we explored how the Sabbath grows our love for God because on Sabbath, God invites us to delight in Him, delights us to delight in His creation. And then last week, we saw that Sabbath isn't just, though, it's not just an invitation to delight. It's also an invitation to join God in mocking and killing the gods of this world. So the gods of consumerism, insatiable desire, the gods of achievement, creating your own value, the gods of numbing and distraction and restlessness, they must die, and Jesus wants you to kill them. So on Sabbath, we are to declare to these gods, "You don't control me. I am no longer your slave. You have been defeated. I am a child of God." Too often, though, we stop right there, and we think that Sabbath and this type of stuff is just about me and my relationship with Jesus. But Moses won't let us. He won't let us, he won't let the ancient Israelites get away with that. That if we claim to love God, if we claim to have experienced the love of God, then I must also love my neighbor as myself. The two can never be separated. And that's where we're going to go today. So our text for today is Deuteronomy chapters really 5 through 8. We're going to pick it up starting in chapter 6 if you want to follow along. Let me set it up. One more time, here's the story we're about to enter into. 3,500 years ago, God's people were enslaved to a king who thought he was the God of this world. The God of this world turned these people who are made in the image of God into his slaves. He devalued them, dehumanized them. Their only identity was in what they could produce for him. So in Pharaoh's world, you are only what you can produce. In Pharaoh's world, you can never rest. And then Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, shows up. He defeats Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt in these 10 spectacular plagues. He leads them into the wilderness, a place of deprivation, to break their addiction from Pharaoh, Egypt, from that way of doing life. It's like a rehab. And then he leads them to Mount Sinai, where they enter into a covenant relationship with him. I am yours and you are mine. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, to death do us part. And he gives them the 10 Commandments. Remember, we said the 10 Commandments are not how you are saved, because these people are already saved. And it's not how to be loved by God, because they're already loved by God. It's how to live the deep, rich fullness of life with God. Today, we're going to pick up this exact same story, but 40 years later. So after 40 years of growing up as children of God, after 40 years of breaking their addiction to the gods of Egypt, after 40 years of learning to trust God for their daily bread, learning to follow God, a cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night, finally, they're at the threshold of entering the promised land. So just this week, 4 of my friends told me stories about taking their kids for the first time off to college. And it's a fearful thing. Like, you spend all this time, 18 years, preparing for this day. And then you get to that day and you go in and you set up all the stuff in their dorm room and you give them a big hug. And then you drive home and you just cry your eyes out. You spent 18 years preparing them for this moment, and now there's nothing more you can do. It's up to them. That's what the book of Deuteronomy is. Moses has spent 4 decades leading, serving, carrying, training, rebuking, teaching God's people, helping them grow up, helping them, preparing them for this moment. You're about to enter the promised land. The training wheels are coming off. The floaties are gone. It's sink or swim time. It's like learn to ride or crash and burn. This is the moment. Moses is going to die. He will no longer be there to hold their hand. God will no longer provide manna from heaven each day. The cloud and the pillar of fire that directs their every step, it will no longer be necessary. So, before you step into this new reality, into this spiritual adulthood, Moses is going to give them one last sermon. And that's what Deuteronomy is. It literally translates, Deuteronomy is a composite word that just means second law. It's a repeat of this way to live this deep, rich fullness of life with God. The training wheels are coming off, and as spiritual adults who don't just eat what Moses spits up into their mouth, but have to go learn to feed for themselves. But before he sends them off, Moses has one big warning, one grave concern for God's people. You are going to become wealthy. So, Deuteronomy chapter 6, picking it up in verse 10. When the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to give you, a land with large, flourishing cities you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. Then when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. So, here's the context. These are people who've only known life in the desert. They've never had more than a day's worth of food. Remember, their daily bread. And that's always been just enough. That's been enough. Now, instantly, he says, you're going to go into this place and you are going to become stupidly wealthy. You are going to have homes you didn't build, vineyards you didn't plant, wells you didn't dig. And this abundance is going to make it really, really, really easy for you to forget. To forget that you were once slaves to a system of endlessly storing up wealth. To forget that everything you have is a gift from God. You didn't do anything to earn it. To forget that satisfaction itself is a gift from God, not something you find on the other side of more. To forget God. So Moses, he holds on to this theme, like I said, for multiple chapters, a good 4 chapters of this book. Listen to how he words this in chapter 8. Deuteronomy 8, starting in verse 10. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Be careful that you do not forget, there's the word, the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I am giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. He led you through the vast and dreadful wilderness, that thirsty and waterless land with its venomous snakes and scorpions. He brought you water out of a hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the wilderness, something your ancestors had never known, to humble and test you, so that in the end it might go well with you. You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, For it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors, as it is today. So he says, in the desert, God had no competition. It was either receive life as a gift from God or die of hunger and thirst. There's like really no in between there. But in the promised land, you're going to have a choice, you see. It's like the training wheels come off. There's a choice, and it's a very adult choice here. How do you want to live your life? How will you choose to make your way, to find your identity, to seek your satisfaction? Again, this is like dropping off a young man or woman going off to college for the first time. Suddenly they have the freedom. Like maybe they had to live a certain way in your household or under their parents' rules. But now, for the first time in life, it's really not up to anyone except them. Who do you want to be? How do you want to live? And in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses presents two paths, two ways of viewing life. And the first is this, to view life as commodity. This is what they came out of in Egypt. And he says they could bring it right back into the promised land if they're not careful. It's where my meaning, value, identity, they are found in impersonal things. In the things I own, in the things I do, in the things I achieve. In the freedom I have and how others view me, in personal things. The life is about acquisition. It's about acquiring stuff and degrees and followers and experiences or even converts. Whatever you define as meaningful, it is something to be taken and earned and deserved and achieved and done with however you please because you earned it. Happiness, then, is having the freedom to do what I want with what I have earned. So life is to be managed and worked over so that you can squeeze as much happiness out of it as possible. And people in this view, they're commodities too. They are valued by what they do, achieve, know, experience. People are projects to achieve. They are problems to solve. They are competition to beat out. They are objectified. Moses says that's one view. That's one view of life, and that's a natural view that you're going to come into when you face this much wealth. But there's a second view, and it's that life is covenant. The second option was revealed by God at Mount Sinai, and it is starkly different. Life is covenant. Covenant is the thing that forms a family. Covenant is the thing that takes a man and a woman, and the two suddenly become one flesh, the Bible says. Covenant is what happens when a family finds an orphan from the other side of the world and adopts them into it, and that orphan finds a home, a life. It's what binds people together forever. It's fundamentally and irrevocably about relationships. The reality itself is not found in what you do or achieve or experience, but it is in knowing and being known, loving and being loved. And this is so different than life as commodity. According to God, reality itself is personal. That your existence, your reality, isn't found in what you do or what you prefer or what you own. It is found in the I am, a personal God. That life is not about acquisition. It's not about what you acquire in life. It's about relationships. That life, happiness, meaning, satisfaction is something that cannot be earned. Something that is given and inherited. Something that can only be received as pure gift. It's like sleep. It's something that can't be rushed, can't be forced. It's something to which you must surrender to. And in this view, life is covenant. People are never to be treated as objects, never to merely be projects or problems or competition. They are to be loved as God has loved you. They are to be treated like family. People, God's people, are faced with this choice. Will you choose to treat life as a commodity, something you can earn and control, manipulate, and manage, or will you treat it as a covenant, something to which you must submit, something to which you must surrender yourself? Now, at this point in Deuteronomy, Moses realizes it's way too late to teach them anything new. He can't make the decision for them. They're stepping into spiritual adulthood here. So Moses simply says, when you face this choice, and you will face this choice, what kind of life do you want to live? Who do you want to be? When you do, he says in Deuteronomy 5:15, remember how God saved you. Deuteronomy 7:18, remember the gods of this world have already been defeated. Deuteronomy 8:18, remember who you are. 16:3, 16:12, 24:18, 24:22, remember, 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 remember. And how are they to remember these things? How do they remember when life is so busy and there's so much to do and so much to buy and have and achieve and everything's clamoring for their attention? How are they to remember these core truths? The answer is Sabbath. You are to set aside 24 hours every week to step out of the busy, out of the distraction, out of this world of commodities, into God's kingdom. That's how you're to remember. So in Deuteronomy chapter 5, Moses repeats the 10 Commandments that he had given, 40 years earlier. But as the situation has changed, when he gave it to them at Mount Sinai, they were spiritual children getting ready to go on this wilderness journey. Now they're going off to college. They're spiritual adults. So when he talks about Sabbath, he talks about it a little bit differently. Watch this. This is Deuteronomy chapter 5, starting in verse 12. He says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your female or male or female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. Now, up to this point, it's slightly different word choices and things, but it sounds almost identical to what we've already heard in Exodus chapter 20 at Mount Sinai. But then, in this last line, Moses adds something that's critical here. He says, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. In Hebrew, it literally just says, like you. That they should do it exactly like you. They should experience exactly what you experience on Sabbath. So we undeniably live in a world of inequality and division. You got first class and economy, rich, poor, winners, losers, black, white, JV, varsity, Republicans, Democrats, educated, uneducated, urban and rural, people who post cat videos on social media, and people who are wonder why people ever post cat videos on social media. We undeniably live in a world of commodity and acquisition, a world that is impersonal, a world that objectifies, a world that divides and isolates. But that is not the world of Sabbath. On Sabbath, there is no rich and no poor, no CEO and no employee, no black and no white, no male and no female. We are all children of God. On Sabbath, your servants will rest just like you do. They will be invited to delight in God just like you. They are to receive life as a gift and taste satisfaction and know and be known just like you. Now, I want you to appreciate how radical this message is when it was written. Now, we live in a nation that holds these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. But when Moses penned these words, no philosopher, no prophet, no other God, no other nation had ever said anything like this. Ever. If you read through ancient Near Eastern literature, I have, you will find that so-called human rights violations, like things like nations trampling over people, using people, treating people worse than animals, objectifying them, showing a complete disregard for human dignity, this was universal. That's just how the world functioned. Humans were slaves to serve the purpose of the God through the king, period. That's the ancient Near Eastern world in a nutshell. So men were dangerous, women were treated as possessions, children were ignored, immigrants were to be dominated, and other nations were enemies. And then along comes this guy named Moses, and he says, you, all of you, Male and female are made in the image of God. Therefore, you cannot treat other people as tools, as impersonal objects to get whatever you want in life. In fact, if you spill the blood of another human being, your blood must be spilled. Everyone is made in the image of God. Therefore, everyone gets to delight. Everyone gets to rest. Everyone gets a seat at this table. Even your children, even your immigrants, even your servants, men and women. So equality, human dignity, human rights. God thought these ideas up. And when Moses wrote this, it was radical. Now, of course, today we live in a different world. In this bizarre era when people who most passionately believe in equality, human dignity, human rights, they often don't believe in God. They believe in the idea that people are made in the image of God. They just don't necessarily believe in God. They believe in human rights, but they have cut off any basis for human rights. So it's like chopping off a limb that you're actually sitting on. Probably doesn't work out in the end, but anyways, that's for another sermon. My point is this. Moses is not trying to gain popularity with this. He is upending everything in their social world, everything they've known. This does not fit comfortably anywhere in their lives. It would be like telling white people in 1950s Birmingham to have the help come eat with them over Sunday dinner. This would be like telling a bunch of Baptists to open up their house to men stumbling out of a gay bar. It's just really, really uncomfortable here. This is breaking social norms. Why? Because on Sabbath, all of this stops. All these things that divide us, they cease to matter. Sabbath. God's like, give it a rest. Sabbath. Because in God's kingdom, everyone who's willing to join in is welcome to come. Everyone who's willing to join in is welcome to come. Now, you might think I'm exaggerating here. I'm not. So according to Moses, Sabbath is not just a day of the week. Every 7 years was the Sabbath year, in which all debts were canceled and slaves set free. And then every 7 times 7 years, every 49 years, was the year of Jubilee. All debts were canceled, all slaves were set free, and the land went back to its original owners. The land itself could not be permanently bought or sold like some kind of commodity, because it's not a commodity. The land itself was in relationship, had its existence in relationship to God. It was covenant. It was an irrevocable gift. It was an inheritance. And you couldn't just give it away. It came from God. It's in relationship with God. And that's it. Sabbath says life is gift. So people cannot be enslaved to work or debt. It doesn't work like that in God's kingdom. And people can't be treated like objects or possessions or commodities or projects. They're all invited to live as children of God. Sabbath makes AOC look like a centrist. It's radical. Politically radical, socially radical, economically radical. So why? Why would God tell them to take this one day a week and break all social norms and treat their children and women and immigrants and servants with this kind of radical equality and dignity? And the answer comes in verse 15. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Why do we have to treat everyone with this dignity, with this grace, with this undeserved kindness? Because that's how God treated us. Moses says, remember who you were before God showed up. Remember what your life was like. Remember how your life was broken and hopeless and bent and enslaved. But God came after you anyways. He loved you when there was nothing lovely about you. He saved you when you couldn't save yourself. He ran after you even when you ran away from him. He called you his child when you did nothing to deserve it. He gave you everything you have, everything you are, even the ability to enjoy those gifts. It's all gift. Therefore, the Lord has commanded that you, O child of God, should set aside one day a week and act like your Father. Treat others the way God has treated you. Love as you've been loved. Blessed as you've been blessed. That your life was freely given to you, so share it freely with others. You did nothing to deserve God's love, so go out there and show love to someone who did nothing to deserve it. Act like your Father. Show grace to those who didn't deserve it. Love those who are bent and broken by this world. Share this life. Share this joy. Share this gift with anyone, everyone, regardless of their social class, their gender, their political leanings, or their sexual preference. God has been radically gracious to you. Now you, child of God, act like your Father. So how do we break out of this whirlpool of our world? How do we get off this moving sidewalk that's driving us into isolation and division and fake lives? How do we as the church become a people of unity, belonging, dignity, peace in a world of division, isolation, objectification, and competition? Moses' answer, God's answer, is to observe the Sabbath. Set aside 24 hours to remember who you are. Remember what God has done for you. Remember that your identity, your value, your life is a gift from God, and to go out and love others the way God has loved you. So we get a glimpse of this in Isaiah 55, 56. In Isaiah 55, God says through the prophet these words, this great call, "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. You who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without any money, without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear and come to me. Listen that you may live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my faithful promise to David. Your money," he says, "in my kingdom." The invitation is this: your money is no good here. Put it away. Don't invest in don't buy what the world's selling you. That won't quench your deepest thirst. What you're longing for can't be purchased, can't be earned, can't be achieved. It can only be received as a gift. Life is not commodity. It is a covenant. It is a dinner table. It is a family dinner. And who's invited to this dinner? Is it people like us? People who go to church and people who look and act and think and talk like us, right? Well, in Isaiah 56, we get a glimpse of this. He says it's for anyone who keeps the Sabbath. And if we want to know what he means by anyone, he says in Isaiah 56, verse 4, "To the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath." Do you know what a eunuch is? I won't go into great detail here, but these are people who do not fit into normal gender categories, neither male nor female. People who make God's people really, really uncomfortable, who they didn't want at their worship services. What does God say to them? To them, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name better than sons and daughters, that they are not only invited in, they are invited in as my children. And if that's not enough, in verse 6 and following, God points to the foreigners, to those who don't think or look or talk or worship or act like us. They're invited too. In fact, all who keep the Sabbath are invited. We see this same picture in the New Testament in the person of Jesus, eating with tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners. That Sabbath is a day to show radical grace, generosity, kindness, and love to others, especially those who are not like you. Not because they deserve it. Not because you agree with them. Not because you agree with their way of life or you approve it. But simply because that's how God loved you. Freely, graciously, unconditionally. So practically speaking, this is where Sabbath and hospitality, Sabbath and generosity, Sabbath and evangelism all overlap and intertwine. Sabbath is not merely a personal discipline between you and God. It is a call to cross boundaries. Open your home to those who are not like you, to go after those who are far from God, to unconditionally love those who only have ever known love with preconditions. Now, traditionally, this is practiced in hospitality. Not just entertaining your friends, though that's good, but befriending the friendless, feeding the hungry, honoring someone who is beaten down by this world, loving someone who is not loved by culture, calling or visiting someone who's isolated, showing kindness to someone who is not like you. Now, what should you do with this? Well, like Moses, I can't tell you what to do. We're all adults. You're adults now. But like Moses, I want to tell you, just make sure that you take time every single week to remember who you are, whose you are, and what God has done for you. I'm pretty sure you'll make the right choices. See you next week.